Can you talk a little bit about the discrepancy between the role of superdelegates as they're playing out today and as they were intended originally?
Mm-hmm. Well, when superdelegates were created by the Hunt Commission,
Right.
it was contemplated that they be essentially free of the burden of having to make a public declaration of support. Okay, and right now there's a debate going on: should they reflect the will of the people who voted in the state, or are they free to do what they want? I think it's pretty clear if you look at the history of their creation, they're free to do what they want. Now, having said that, that wasn't the only reason they were created. They were created, in my view, and if you look at the technical advisory committee testimony and the proceedings of those early commissions, you'll see that a number of things were contemplated in their creation, and certainly a number of reasons why they should stay in place occurred by what happened in the years that followed. First, to provide that independent source of judgment. Second, to provide some kind of backstop. Sometimes in a nominating process, you could have a nominee, for example, who did very well early on, who became the putative nominee of the party, and then suddenly a huge scandal evokes. We saw on the Republican side, today. There's a scandal involving their putative nominee. So, the Democratic Party wanted a mechanism to say, listen, if something happens in this long process, which happened over the course of many, many months, perhaps we need a mechanism to say, wait a second, this person who won early really shouldn't be the nominee of our party. And finally, there was a belief that we needed some mechanism for closure. That if a couple of candidates competed early, someone got ahead, but not too far ahead, that we'd have a mechanism where people could move towards that nominee. And remarkably now, people, I say this today and no one believes it, they just can't, think it's true. At the time when they were created, it was felt that these elected officials, members of Congress, other party insiders, if they were made delegates, it would actually make the convention more representative. And I know I read this on blogs, and people say, that's ridiculous, I dismiss it on its face. Well, the fact is that the reforms of the 70s were producing delegates who were very, very much activists within the party. And if you looked at those delegates and you looked at the floor of those conventions, it wasn't necessarily the mainstream right-center part of the Democratic Party. It was very much the left and far left of the Democratic Party. So for all these reasons, we created superdelegates, and at different points in time, they played different roles.
And you said basically to prevent the perception that this is an undemocratic system.
That's right.
Is it the fact that they do have to hold off, that there is this conversation going on, is it perception or is it reality that it's an undemocratic system?
Well, I think, I guess it depends on how you define democratic. I don't think our system is intended to be a system where all the delegates are picked on the basis of the results of the primaries. I think there's a wisdom in it that basically says, listen, we've got a big party here. The most important component of the party in choosing its nominee are the votes, are people who participate in primaries and caucuses. Is a principle which we call fair reflection, which is throughout the charter of the Democratic Party, the rules of the Democratic Party, and the call to the convention itself. So all the documents which control this, our framework, talk about the fair reflection of expressed sentiments of voters who participate. And that is, 80% of what we're talking about. So I don't think having these other people involved in the process necessarily detracts from democracy, just the way that I don't think the fact that we have a bill that passes the House then has to go to a Senate, which is elected a different way, and then has to be signed into law by an executive who's elected a completely different way, undermines democracy either. We have different checks and balances, we have different mechanisms. I think they're all part of a democratic institution and a small d and a big D Democratic Party.
So you don't feel that the system is broken or being abused in any way as it is now?
Well, here's the way I feel about judging the nominating process and changing it. I think if you really want to make changes, it's best to wait until after the election. I think the election is a fair and objective standard about the success of the nominating process, because if we produce a nominee of great strength who wins an election in November, it's very different than like in 1972 or in 1980 or something like that. We produce a nominee where our nominating process undercut them and contributed to the other side's victory. So I think the most important aspect of this, frankly, is transparency. What I find remarkable now, having 20 years ago been the delegate counter for Mike Dukakis, and I sit here today, is when we did it back in the 80s, we were the only people who had this information.
No internet, right?
No internet. It sounds strange now, but that's the way we operated. When I first started in 1980, we had this great invention called the fax machine, and we were very excited about it. And in '92, I was a campaign manager. I had a cell phone. It was as big as a brick. It was incredible. But I think now, when I look at it and I say you can go to a website and you can see all the names of the superdelegates, and I think it's a great time. And I think what we have to do as a party is make sure that we are fully participating in that age.
Back on that, and the fact that we've ultimately come to this situation, personally, how does that make you feel? What do you think about that?
Well, I was, listen, I was teaching at Boston University at the time, and Tony Corrado, who I've known for many years, is still at Colby College and was teaching there as well. We were, approaching this from an academic and not a political perspective, and having done it as an operative, but then stepped back and looked at it as and as an academic in those days. For me, I wanted to make a statement about what was going to happen, and I wanted to do it in hopefully a neutral and unbiased way. And I think that kind of advice, frankly, is the type of advice our party should rely on in the future if we change these rules.
Do you think the same for the vote?
Nice to be with you. Good to talk to you.
Log on to y2sday.org for more information. Talk to you guys soon.